Hello and welcome to the next edition of the Full-Time Little Podcast. As it's been widely reported that Leganes owner Felipe Moreno is fronting the potential Wigan Athletic takeover, which is currently subject to EFL approval, I'm delighted to have been joined by Sam Leveridge, who is a Spanish football journalist based in Madrid, to help give Wigan Athletic fans more of an insight into Felipe Moreno. So first and foremost, Sam, can you possibly give us a bit of an introduction into who you are, your coverage of Spanish football and your connections to Leganes?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sam. I work in Madrid. I live in Spain, and yeah, so I'm kind of based in Madrid and doing some work for La Liga Lowdown, the main one, and then also for Marca in English, which is kind of one of the big sports newspapers in Spain, which is a big deal out in there for their English website. And yeah, so Leganes is not one of the major teams in Madrid, but they were in La Liga, the top division, until this season. They were relegated in the summer. And yeah, so I spent quite a lot of time at Leganes in games, watching their games at Butarque, which is their stadium, and yeah, kind of a bit of a Leganes fan as well.
So I think the best question to start with surrounding Moreno is who is he and how did he apply his trade before he became the owner of Leganes?
He was actually a footballer, not a very good one, but he used to play for Leganes actually when they were down in the lower divisions. And yeah, he was never really kind of a star or anything like that, but kind of a lower league journeyman footballer. Retired quite young, I think it was due to an injury, and then he went into business. And from there, he's kind of built up an empire, built in the construction industry, which is kind of where all of his money has come from. And then I think he was very young. He was only in his 30s when he decided to buy Leganes back in 2008, and kind of became the majority shareholder there. So yeah, his objective was always to end his footballing career, make as much money as he could, and then come straight back into football and with Leganes, which is his local club.
How would you describe Felipe Moreno's time at Leganes to date since he saved the club from liquidation back in 2008?
It's been a huge success. I mean, looking back in 2008, it makes Wigan look like a stable ship almost. I mean, in 2008 they were with protests. I mean, the players weren't being paid, and there was a protest on the pitch where the players I can't remember. I think it was against Atletico Madrid B. They had the ball at kickoff, kicked it off for a throw in, and then all took a knee and just sat there waiting for 5 minutes before they went on to play the rest of the game. And that was all because they hadn't been paid. The club was a complete mess. They'd had 2 changes of ownership in the space of 6 months. And Felipe Moreno came in, obviously, as a young guy, and without kind of the big business track record, there were plenty of people who weren't entirely convinced. But he's taken them from kind of on the brink of bankruptcy in 2008 to being in the top division. And they were there for quite a few years, 4 years, I think, in total, 3-4 years. And they really kind of established themselves and were competing. I mean, they beat Barcelona only a year or two ago, and they were kind of a solid club. They were never kind of one that's always going to stay in La Liga, stay in Primera, but they were the kind of team that you knew that they'd be more or less fighting relegation, but while they were still in La Liga, they were one of those teams that would get just about enough points every year to stay up. And then off the field as well, off the field is incredible. I mean, Leganes, for me, Leganes are still one of the teams that are best run, best organised in all of Spain. I mean, in terms of their marketing efforts and that kind of thing, they have huge international marketing, more than almost any other club in Spain. And this is for a team that's in Segunda and not one of the biggest clubs.
I like how you've touched upon marketing there. It's one of my later questions, so I'll bring that forward. What are Leganes' commercial and marketing philosophies?
They're very, very into engagement. They're very into the international market as well. So I think that's going to be interesting to see how they link it up with Wigan. I know they've got some links with, not official links as such in terms of business links, but they do a lot of marketing activities with baseball teams in the US. And Leganes have their mascot Super Pepino, which is a big deal for them. They're very active on social media and with their English channels, that kind of thing as well. And they're very open to new media. I mean, speaking as a journalist in Madrid, one of the main challenges that you have is that a lot of Spanish clubs aren't very open to digital media. They're only open to kind of the traditional print media. So imagine if in the UK, the only people who could get accreditation would be kind of the Times, the Guardian, and the Sun, and nobody else. That's what it's like with some of the clubs in Spain, but at Leganes, they're very open. So at Leganes, you can go to a game with accreditation. You'll find people who do podcasts. You'll find people who do kind of blogs and all sorts. And Leganes are very good at engaging with that and organising interviews, organising all kinds of things. Leganes are really switched on there. I think that's kind of from Felipe Moreno all the way down. All the people that they have at Leganes are very kind of open to new ideas, basically.
What was Leganes' commercial agreement and relationship with the Saudi Arabia-based technology, media, and telecommunications group Embels? Couldn't get my word out then.
No problem. So it was just kind of an agreement to further support the club because, I mean, Moreno obviously isn't made of money, but he has invested quite a lot. And it was just a couple of years ago, once they'd kind of stabilised in La Liga, they'd had that first season or two back, and they're kind of then looking to the future and thinking, how can we now push on? How can we go from being the minnows who are just here to survive to try and build up? And in the end, it hasn't quite worked out as was hoped, but it brought in some extra investment.
You mentioned at the start that when Felipe Moreno first took over the club, there was a few fans that was a little bit unconvinced. How has he since won them over, and what is his relationship like with the fans?
It's a bit of a strange one, really, thinking about all of the success that he's brought in, because the fans, I mean, Moreno isn't the kind of hands-on owner that you're going to see in the press all the time or doing interviews or constantly engaging with people. He's kind of more of a hands-off kind of guy. I mean, the president of Leganes is actually his wife, Victoria Pavon, and she's kind of the one who does all the day-to-day kind of the press, the interviews, all of the representing the club, that kind of thing. And Felipe is the vice president, so he'll kind of step in sometimes, but he doesn't have that kind of hands-on role. I mean, most fans are very appreciative of everything that he's done for the club, and think that he's a great kind of leader, a great figure. The only real criticism came in this year in the January transfer window, where they perhaps didn't manage the transfer window as well as they could have hoped. But I mean, it was eventually what led to their relegation. They had two brilliant strikers, Enazadi and Martin Braithwaite. And in January, they agreed to sell Enazadi to Sevilla. The controversy there was that for his release clause, which every player in Spain has a release clause that they have to be allowed to leave if a bid comes in for that amount, was for 20 million euros. And Leganes, to try and ease things over with Sevilla, said, look, if you pay us 20 million euros in installments and you give us a couple of players on loan, then we'll do a deal. And so at the time, it seemed like a good idea. The issue was that they then didn't bring anyone in to replace Enazadi. And a couple of weeks later, Barcelona came in and stole Braithwaite with a bit of a dodgy ruling in the Spanish rules, a loophole, which basically left Leganes without a striker for the rest of the season. So that was where they came under a bit of criticism, but at the same time, it was very hard to have foreseen that coming.
What would you say are Moreno's biggest strengths as an owner?
I say he's very well organised, and he's kind of got the right people in around him as well. I mean, he's not kind of an owner who's going to try and do everything himself. He's very much kind of guy that will hire the right people to take on the right roles, and he's obviously got a great relationship with his wife, Victoria, and it'll be interesting to see how involved she is with Wigan, or whether she steps back from Leganes at all, or what kind of the priorities would be there. But he does surround himself with the right people. He makes some good decisions. I mean, it's very hard to find a decision from Felipe Moreno that hasn't worked out. I mean, obviously that one that we just touched upon with the transfer business in the January window, but generally their appointments in terms of managers have been very good. They're very patient in that regard. I mean, Asier Heredano was one guy who they appointed when they were in the third division, the third tier of Spanish football, and he took them straight up to Primera, and Leganes stuck with him all the way through. And even when the team was kind of fighting relegation, they stuck with him, and it worked out. So I think he's kind of a guy who he does make good decisions. He doesn't rush into kind of any decisions or anything like that. And he's definitely the kind of person who can bring stability to a football club.
What is his general reputation in Spanish football?
I say he's almost in a way underrated as an owner. I mean, Spain is very well known for its kind of crazy owners, crazy club presidents, and that kind of thing. We've had some really mad stories, but I think with Felipe Moreno, it's kind of more of a stable. He knows what he's doing, but he's not the guy who's going to be on the front pages or anything like that. So I think a lot of people don't even realize who Felipe Moreno is. I think if you went into an average La Liga game and started talking about Felipe Moreno, people would look at you like, who's that? But then I think he has done an excellent job, and the people who know what he's done with Leganes do kind of appreciate him as one of the geniuses of Spanish football.
What is Leganes' reputation in Spanish football as a club? Are they quite universally well liked?
Yeah, Leganes are very well liked. I mean, they're very much seen as kind of a family club that it's fun to go to a game at Leganes, and anybody can go along. and they're very much seen as kind of the minnows who are punching above their weight. And it reminds me a bit actually of Wigan when they first went up to the Premier League, and it was kind of the wait a second, what are Wigan doing in the Premier League? Well, it was the same with Leganes. What are Leganes doing in Primera? And then they stayed there for quite a few years, built up their reputation. It was very much kind of it's nice. It's a feel good story to see a team like that come up from the lower leagues and establish themselves. And they are such an open club that have the right kind of messaging, the right kind of values. So it was good to see.
You mentioned that they are a family club. What is their work like in the community?
In the community, they're very involved. I mean, Leganes is kind of a small suburb on the outskirts of Madrid, and so it's quite a small community. But especially with the COVID pandemic, Leganes was one of the worst affected areas in all of Spain. And the club was very keen. I mean, they did lots of donations. I mean, the players were donating their wages. The club was doing kind of food bank collections, that kind of thing. It's been very, very solid in their approach to kind of that community feel and to seeing how they can get involved. And I think they even released a third kit, which they're using this season, which was kind of dedicated to healthcare staff and professionals that they've been working through the pandemic, with some of the sales going towards charity and that kind of thing. So they're very much a club that is committed to the community.
That sounds very positive. And to revert back to things now, so relating to the field of football, is what is his typical recruitment model for Leganes?
With Leganes, it's been a bit of a strange one. They rely quite a lot on loan deals, on getting good players, kind of good young players, from the likes of Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid, bringing them in on loan and then kind of nurturing them. I mean, the best example, one of their best players last season was Oscar Rodriguez, who came in from Real Madrid. He was basically unheard of at the time. He came in from their B team and had no first team experience or anything like that. But he was with Leganes for 2 years. And then in the summer, when he went back to Real Madrid, they sold him for 30, 40 million euros to Sevilla. And so that's very much kind of the model, to bring in young players and then develop them, but also to bring in a couple of more experienced kind of seasoned professionals who come in and know exactly what it takes to win. So, I mean, one of the guys they signed last summer was Roque Mesa, who was with Swansea a couple of years ago, who's a player who really knows the first division. He's not kind of an exceptional player. He's never going to be the best player on the pitch, but he's one of those players who you know that he knows what it's going to take. He's going to be a solid 6 or 7 out of 10 every single game. And so it's kind of the blend of that, of young talents and also the seasoned professionals to kind of help them to mature.
Do you believe his recruitment model could be effective in English football?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, if you think of how it could apply to Wigan, for example, I mean, if they can get kind of good relationships in terms of loan deals and things with clubs, then I think that same kind of approach could work very well. I think the issue that they might find is that they haven't tended to invest in kind of big money signings or anything like that. And obviously with Wigan, there will be times where you need to kind of put the money in and bring in the players. With Leganes, there's kind of been times where they promised to do that, but never quite come to it, or when they have, it hasn't been the right man that they brought in. So it will be interesting to see, but overall they do tend to bring in the right kind of players.
What is his typical expenditure when it comes to transfers and recruitment?
Very low. So kind of as I touched on, there's a lot of loan deals to bring players in on loan, or to sign players on free transfers as well. They don't tend to spend big, and often the big investments that they would make would be more on paying high wages for a player on loan than signing a player for millions of pounds or millions of euros.
In terms of now into the football side, you mentioned young players on loan, but what is the Leganes academy system like?
Yeah, it's pretty strong. I mean, the B team is currently in Tercera, which is the 4th tier of Spanish football, but they have kind of built that up, and it's been one of Moreno's big things. Obviously, he only came in 2008, which is 12 years ago, and so these kinds of things do take time. But Leganes' academy is improving, it is growing. I mean, they have produced some great players. Dani Carvajal, the Real Madrid right back, he originally came through the ranks at Leganes. And so that's one of the areas that I think Moreno is working on. They've built a new training ground, which was opened only 3 or 4 years ago when they first came up into La Liga. And that's kind of been their big project to get that in place, to then really kick on with the academy and the youth players, so that they can kind of use those facilities, which are now kind of among some of the top clubs in Spain, and to then bring that on and bring the academy into the top level as well.
How important is it for Leganes to develop top young players to be competitive in the Spanish leagues?
I think, to be fair to Leganes, I mean, they do bring players through, and they do have players who do feature for the first team, but the way that they've kind of managed the market, and with these loan deals, as I said before, they bring in so many talented youngsters who don't have any first team experience. They're only teenagers or early 20s, that they don't necessarily need to rely on their own youth system for that kind of player. So it is kind of an interesting mix. Towards the end of last season, we saw a lot more of Leganes' youth players getting into the team. They got some promising talents coming through, and I'm sure we'll see more of those this season. But I think, yeah, they kind of almost have more of a preference for these young loan players than for their own kind of talented youngsters. But again, I'm not sure we can judge that entirely on Moreno's approach, because it is kind of dependent on the quality of the players coming through. And I think Wigan would probably have a higher caliber of player coming through than Leganes might have had in general over the last few years.
Yeah, I was just about to touch on at Wigan Athletic, we've got a really good academy at the moment, so a lot of really bright prospects coming through. And do you think that could be what attracted Felipe Moreno to buy Wigan Athletic, and obviously his interest there?
Yeah, I'm sure I will have. I mean, Felipe Moreno is a very shrewd businessman. I'm sure he'll be looking at that and thinking, if at Leganes we've had to bring young players in on loan to have that kind of talent, then why not go to Wigan, where we've got those kind of players already there? We don't have to pay any loan fees, any wages or anything like that. We've already got them there, and then in a few years we can sell them on for more money. I'm sure that'll be his thinking there. So it will be interesting to see what kind of approach they take. But yeah, as you say, Wigan's got some really good, promising young players, and I'm sure that he'll be looking to rely on those and as they build the squad.
Do you think that Moreno could potentially link the two clubs together in some ways?
Yeah, I imagine that'll be quite an interesting one. It's a strange one because of kind of where the two clubs are at now. Then maybe you could say both clubs could be doing a little bit better than where they are. And so I imagine it will probably rely upon who does better in the first kind of few years. If we see that Leganes go back up into Primera, then maybe it would be more of Wigan supporting Leganes. Whereas if Wigan do start to climb up the leagues, then maybe it'll be the other way around. Obviously, he's got a lot of work to do with Wigan if the deal goes through. But I think with Leganes, they kind of got that stable setup there, that maybe it is just a question of sending some of the talented youngsters to Wigan to add to the squad they've got there already. Obviously, there's not a great tradition of young English players in La Liga, but maybe that'll be something that we can see more of if there are some players that start to move towards Leganes from Wigan.
In terms of Leganes and the supporters, is there fan representation and involvement in the running of the club?
Not directly, to a certain extent, I don't think, but I know that the fans are very involved, and there's not kind of any malice between them. So I have to be honest, I'm not sure if there is anyone in the board in terms of fan representation, but I know that they do engage quite a lot with fans and with the supporters groups. They have kind of an ultras group who are at the games. They have a dedicated area in the stadium, and they get on very well with the club, and there's no problems there with the relationship. So I think it's quite different in Spain, the fan representation in boardrooms and that kind of thing. There's not such a big movement for it, but then there is kind of that good relationship that there's no push for that to happen either.
As an avid football fan yourself, would you be happy if Felipe Moreno was the man in charge of your football club?
Yeah, I think he's an excellent owner, and I think there's very little that you can really criticise him for. I think the work that he's done with Leganes is excellent, and if I was a Wigan fan right now, I'd be pretty excited about what he can do there. I mean, how he's took Leganes from the brink of bankruptcy in the third tier to playing among the very best, and with improvements on the stadium, a new training ground. I mean, it's kind of the fairy tale stuff that I'm sure if Felipe Moreno had written a 12-year plan when he joined the club, then it probably wouldn't have differed too much from where they are today.
There's a lot of similarities between Leganes and Wigan Athletic in terms of their stories. You've touched upon it earlier. I think my final question is, and thanks so much for your time, is do you believe you can be a success at Wigan Athletic?
I think so. If I had to say yes or no, I'd definitely say yes. I think he's kind of made for the challenges that there are at Wigan almost. Obviously, it's going to be very different for him to have to learn about the English football kind of setup and how things are different there to in Spain. I mean, there are some big cultural differences as well, which he'll have to get used to. But I think, saying that at the same time, he has always surrounded himself with the right people to make decisions, and I think he's quite a good guy in terms of recognizing when he's not the guy to make that decision, or he's not the best informed to make a call, and then he'll rely on somebody else who maybe is. And so I think that'll be the most interesting thing in the first few months of his time at Wigan, will be to see kind of who he brings in, who he surrounds himself with. And I think that will be the first kind of real indication we'll have of how much of a success he'll be at Wigan. I think long term he'll be a success, but how quickly that success comes, I think, will rely on the kind of people he surrounds himself with, and whether they bring in kind of somebody with experience in English football to help him to kind of execute that same plan as at Leganes, but for Wigan.
It sounds very promising if Felipe Moreno is approved by the EFL and becomes a new owner of Wigan Athletic. And I'd like to thank you for your time today, for coming on the podcast to talk about Felipe Moreno and give a bit more insight to what we particularly want here in the general media. Is there anything you'd like to plug of yourself before we end the podcast? I always like to ask guests, is there anything they'd like to share?
Yeah, no, I mean, check us out on Twitter at La Liga Lowdown. I mean, we love Leganes over there, so lots of coverage of Leganes, and you can certainly see some of what they've been up to, and we interact with them quite a lot on Twitter and that kind of thing as well. So you can definitely see kind of how they engage with the international media and get an idea of what Leganes are about as a club, and give us a follow over there on Twitter, and that's it.
Thank you, and thanks again for your time today. It's much appreciated.
Thanks, Jay.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Full Time Whittle podcast, please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks so much for watching. It's always appreciated.